Prince told me he'd be gone in 7 days, and then, just like that, he was. I didn't think much of it at the time. Who would? I mean, it's Prince, right? But when that seventh day came, I watched him disappear in front of me, and I've never been able to forget it. I still don't know what happened. I don't know why he said it, but I know what I saw. I can't keep it inside anymore. I have to tell you, because what I saw that day wasn't just a prediction. It was a warning. But before that, let me take you back to how it all started. This happened back in 2016, a few months before we lost Prince. I didn't know him well, but I worked there enough to get a sense of the place, how alive it felt, even when the music stopped. You could almost feel the energy in the walls, the aura of someone who had left an indelible mark on the world. Prince wasn't just a celebrity, he was a force, and that energy seeped into every corner of that building. I worked long hours, mostly keeping an eye on things, making sure everything was in order, doing rounds through the building. It wasn't glamorous, just the usual stuff. But there was always something a little different about Paisley Park. It wasn't just the lavish decor or the iconic memorabilia scattered throughout. There was a vibe, a pull. You could feel it in the air, like something was always just beyond your reach. Something that felt like it belonged to a different realm entirely. And then there was Prince himself. He was a presence, even from afar. I never really had much direct interaction with him, but you couldn't work there without noticing the gravity he carried with him. It wasn't just the celebrity aura. It was deeper than that. He moved through the building like a living legend, his every word calculated, his every move intentional. He'd greet staff members and fans alike with a certain calmness, but you could see that there was always something going on behind his eyes, something that was always aware of its surroundings, always alert. People who worked with him said he had a gift. He was tuned in to things most people couldn't see. It wasn't just about music for him, it was about energy, about knowing things before they happened. It was a kind of knowing that I never fully understood until that night. I'll never forget the day he told me he'd be gone in 7 days. At the time, it didn't make sense. It seemed like just another cryptic comment, like something he'd say just to keep people on edge, to make them question things. But now, I realize he wasn't joking. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. I don't know how to explain it, but I know one thing for sure. He knew. I was finishing up my rounds one night when I ran into him near the lounge area. He was standing by one of the windows, looking out at the night sky. There was a certain stillness about him, like he was deep in thought. His usual aura of confidence was there, but it was different this time, more introspective, like something was weighing heavily on him. I stopped to say hi, not wanting to disturb him, but he looked over at me, his eyes locking with mine in that intense way he had. "You know," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I won't be here much longer. 7 days, and I'll be gone." I didn't know what to say. It almost sounded like a joke, but there was no humor in his tone. I didn't think much of it at the time, not in that moment. I thought maybe it was just another one of his eccentric, cryptic comments. He was known for them. But something about the way he said it stayed with me, like it was an offhand remark with a deeper meaning I wasn't picking up on. I nodded, gave him a quick smile, and walked away. But as I made my way through the building, the words, "I'll be gone in 7 days," kept echoing in my head. I pushed it aside, telling myself I was overthinking it. But over the next few days, that comment lingered, growing heavier, more ominous. The building felt different. The air seemed thicker. Even the music, when it played, had a kind of haunting undertone to it. It wasn't the usual upbeat energy. It felt more distant, like there was something else at play. I started to notice more strange things, small things. Things I hadn't noticed before, the way the lights would flicker intermittently, the sudden drops in temperature in certain parts of the building, and the strange sounds. Footsteps when no one was around, doors opening and closing without explanation. I tried to brush it off, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more it started to feel like the building itself was reacting to whatever Prince had said. And then, 2 days later, I saw something that shook me to my core. I had just finished my shift and was heading toward the back door when I passed the hallway that led to the main part of the estate. I wasn't supposed to be in that area at that time, but I was curious. Something in my gut telling me to go that way. As I walked down the hall, I saw him, Prince, standing in the doorway of a small room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, but it wasn't unusual. What struck me was the look on his face. He wasn't looking at me, but his expression was intense, almost like he was in a trance. There was a faint glow coming from the room behind him, soft but unnatural, like the light itself was breathing. I should have walked away. I should have kept going. But I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, watching him, wondering if he even noticed me standing there. The door creaked open slowly, and I took a step forward just to see what was going on. The light in the room grew brighter, almost blinding. It was like the walls were pulsating, breathing with some kind of unseen energy. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure building, like the room was pushing against me. That's when Prince spoke again, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I told you. 7 days." He turned to look at me, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't just intense. It was knowing. Knowing. Like he could see through me, through my every thought, every fear. Then without another word, he stepped back into the room, and the door shut behind him with a soft click. I stood there for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't breathe. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. But that was just the beginning. It had been 2 days since that strange encounter with Prince, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to go about my usual routine, showing up for my shift, doing my rounds, keeping things in order, but the atmosphere at Paisley Park had changed. There was an eerie stillness to it now, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it was just paranoia. It was just the late hours and the weight of the job getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I walked into the building like I had 1,000 times before. The doors opening with that familiar creak, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. The lobby was quiet, a stark contrast to the usual energy I'd feel when the place was alive with visitors. There was no buzz in the air, no conversations or laughter echoing from the other rooms. It was just silent, almost suffocatingly so. The photos of Prince on the walls, the gold records, the memorabilia, all seemed to stare down at me as I moved through the space, reminding me of the man I had once seen as an icon. But today, they felt more like ghosts, like they were waiting for something to happen too. The receptionist, Maria, was at her desk, her eyes glued to the computer screen. She didn't greet me like she normally would, but I didn't think much of it. She was always a bit distant, never overly friendly. I offered a nod, and she barely looked up, just a faint acknowledgement as I passed. I couldn't help but notice the way she sat stiffly in her chair, the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't acting like herself, and it made me wonder if everyone in this place had started to feel it too. I made my way down the hall toward the main building, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The air was thick and heavy, colder than it should have been, but I brushed it off. The AC was probably acting up again. I wasn't supposed to be in the part of the building where Prince's private quarters were, but I had to pass by it to get to the other rooms I needed to check. There was a certain pull I felt, a strange compulsion to keep moving forward, even though every part of me told me to turn back. I reached the hallway where his private space was located. The door to his area was closed, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow shift behind it. It was probably just the light. Probably. But my heart began to race nonetheless. I couldn't ignore the creeping sensation that there was something I wasn't supposed to see. Something I wasn't supposed to know. I stood there for a moment, trying to force myself to walk away. But then I heard it. The faintest sound. A rustling maybe. A shuffle. It was coming from inside the room. I shouldn't have even considered going in there. I wasn't supposed to. But there was something about the sound. Something familiar in the way it made the hairs on my neck stand on end that pulled me closer. I didn't know if it was instinct or if it was just the sheer weight of everything that had happened in the last few days, but I couldn't ignore it. I pushed the door open, slowly, trying not to make a sound. The room inside was dimly lit, with heavy curtains blocking out the daylight from the outside. The walls were lined with albums, records, framed photos, and a collection of instruments that looked untouched. It was the kind of space that felt timeless, filled with the echo of the music that had come from Prince's soul. It had that familiar scent, too, like incense mixed with something woody, almost like cedar. It should have been comforting, but there was something off about it now. Something in the air that felt heavier than usual. I stepped further into the room, my footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. My eyes scanned the space, looking for anything unusual. Everything seemed in place. His guitars leaned against the wall, his piano sat in the corner, and the walls were covered with the same iconic images of him. But then, my gaze fell on something else. A chair near the window, empty. A glass of water on the table next to it, still half full, but untouched. I didn't know why, but I couldn't stop looking at the glass. It wasn't out of place, but it felt like it was waiting for something. It felt like the entire room was waiting. I walked over, my hands lightly brushing against the table as I passed. It was then I noticed something else, something subtle but enough to make my heart skip a beat. The air around me was cold. I don't mean just a chill in the room, but a sharp cold. Like stepping into an ice box. It cut through me, and I stopped in my tracks, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but no one was there. I stepped back, confused. The room seemed normal. Everything appeared to be, as it had always been. But something inside me was screaming that it wasn't. It wasn't just the cold. It was the way the air felt still suffocating, like I was in a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The glass on the table, the objects around me, they were too still, too perfect. I had the overwhelming sense that something had been moved. It wasn't just the physical space, it was the energy, too. It was different now, heavy, like it had been holding its breath for a long time, and now it was exhaling. I glanced over at the guitar on the wall, and then I saw it. An old photograph, tucked behind it, just barely visible at the edge of the frame. I reached for it without thinking. My fingers brushed the frame and pulled it out. It was a picture of Prince, but not one I had seen before. He was younger in the photo, much younger, standing in front of what looked like a different building, a place I didn't recognize. But there was something in his expression, something haunting in the way he looked at the camera. His eyes were wide, almost too wide, like he knew something he wasn't supposed to. Like he was preparing for something, even then. I couldn't help but feel like it was a warning. I turned the photo over, but there was no description, no caption, just a dark stain on the back. I didn't know what it was. Maybe it was just old ink, but something about it unsettled me. My mind was racing, and before I could think about it any longer, I heard a sound, a faint tapping noise, like someone was knocking at the window. I froze. I looked toward the window, expecting to see someone standing outside, but no one was there. Just the dark shadows of the trees outside, swaying in the breeze. My body felt heavy, and the unease in my chest grew. I couldn't explain it. Something in the room had shifted, and it was as if the very walls were closing in around me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt trapped in a place that had once felt safe, and now it felt like a prison. I turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, I heard it again. This time louder, more deliberate. The sound of footsteps, but they weren't mine. They were coming from the other side of the room. I stopped. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. Something inside me was telling me to get out, that I wasn't supposed to be there. But when I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing. Except the glass of water on the table. It was gone. I ran. And that was just the beginning. I had no intention of going back to Paisley Park so soon after that night. But there I was, walking through the front entrance, the eerie weight of everything still lingering in my chest. The oddness of the night before, the unexplainable cold, the whispering shadows in Prince's room. All of it clung to me like a thick fog. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking everything. But the gut feeling that something wasn't right, that feeling didn't go away. The air inside was strangely still as I stepped through the lobby. The usual hustle and bustle of the building, staff coming and going, visitors moving between rooms, was absent. It was as if everything had been muted. It was unnerving, yet familiar. The walls, covered in framed photographs of Prince at various stages of his career, seemed to watch me as I walked past them. His eyes, ever so intense, felt like they were following me, weighing me. Maria, the receptionist, was at her desk when I entered. Normally, she greeted me with a quick smile or a nod. But today, she didn't even glance up from her computer screen. It wasn't just the silence that struck me. It was the way she was sitting, hunched over, her posture stiff. She didn't seem like herself, and the sight made my unease grow. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just looking for something to worry about. I had a job to do. I walked past her, heading toward the back hallways where I would check the security footage, do my rounds, and leave. But something felt off. I didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the dim lighting, the unnatural stillness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking through a place I didn't belong anymore. Like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I reached the hallway that led to Prince's private rooms, but this time, something was different. The door to the section of the building that was typically locked, off limits to all staff except for those with permission, was slightly ajar. I didn't know if it had always been that way, but it felt wrong. I tried to ignore it, to just continue with my work, but my curiosity got the better of me. I paused, peeking inside. The hallway beyond was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. I didn't see anyone, just the usual objects, paintings, shelves, furniture. But the moment I stepped closer, a chill hit me again. It wasn't as intense as before, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I turned and walked away, but before I could go any further, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming from the other end of the hall. I turned quickly, expecting to see one of the staff members or even a guest, but there was no one there. The hall was empty. I walked faster, my heart thudding in my chest, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I reached the security room to check the footage. I ran through the usual checks, reviewing the cameras in various parts of the building. But when I got to the feed for the hallway near Prince's room, something caught my eye. The footage from that specific camera was corrupted. I tried to rewind it, but the screen just flashed with static before returning to the usual footage. I pulled up the other angles of the hallway, but they were all fine. All except for that one camera. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe it was just a technical glitch, but something told me it wasn't. I sat there, staring at the blank feed, feeling a tightening in my chest. It wasn't like the camera had just malfunctioned. It was as if someone had intentionally erased it. Before I could dwell on it any longer, I heard the familiar sound of someone approaching the room. I turned, expecting to see a colleague, but it was a guest, a man I didn't recognize. He was standing at the door, watching me with a gaze that made my skin prickle. I wasn't sure why, but something about the way he looked at me seemed wrong. His eyes didn't just glance at me, they lingered, intense and calculating. He wasn't smiling. In fact, there was no warmth to his expression at all. It was like he was studying me, evaluating me, almost as if he knew something I didn't. It wasn't the kind of look you'd expect from someone just passing by. It was unsettling. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice more defensive than I intended. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with that same unreadable expression, his gaze flickering from my face to the security monitor. "Just admiring the place," he finally said. His voice was low, flat, like he wasn't really speaking to me, but to the air around us. "Okay," I said, stepping aside. I didn't know what else to say. He wasn't exactly a threat, but something about his presence made me want to hurry up and get away from him. I quickly turned my attention back to the security footage, but as I did, I saw him move. Not toward the exit, as I had expected, but toward the hallway leading to Prince's rooms. I called after him, my voice trembling just slightly. "You can't go back there, sir. The rooms are restricted." But he didn't stop. In fact, he didn't even look back. He just walked down the hallway, his footsteps soft but deliberate. I followed him for a moment, hesitating, but then I stopped myself. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just security. It wasn't my job to stop him. I took a step back, trying to shake off the unease in my chest. That man hadn't looked like a guest who was just admiring the place. There was something about him, something off. I watched him disappear around the corner, and I could feel the tension in my body spike. There was no reason for the way he'd looked at me. No reason for the way he was acting. It felt like he was hiding something. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I glanced toward the restricted area, and for a split second, I felt a strange impulse to follow him, to make sure he didn't go into the room I'd seen earlier, to confront him, to demand to know what he was doing. But that wasn't my place. I knew better. I turned around and walked back toward the exit. I was getting too worked up. I didn't want to be involved in whatever was going on here. It was just another strange night at Paisley Park. It wasn't like it was the first time someone had acted oddly. I needed to focus. But as I reached the door, I heard it again. A faint knock. Not from the door I was about to leave through, but from the other side of the building, the direction the guest had gone. I stopped. My blood ran cold, and my stomach dropped. That was when I knew. Something was off. Something was happening that I wasn't supposed to see. But that was just the beginning. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot that the unease really started to settle in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had told myself it was just my imagination, just the late hours and the tension in the air. But as I leaned against my car, staring out at the quiet parking lot, it hit me. Everything was too quiet. The usual bustle of Paisley Park had faded into a strange, unsettling calm. The few remaining staff members had gone home, and the silence wrapped around me like a thick fog. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, but my instincts told me otherwise. Something had shifted. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I could feel it in my bones, deep in the pit of my stomach. I drove home, but I didn't feel any better. My hands were still shaking on the wheel, and my mind kept racing back to the things I'd seen. The man who had stared at me, the odd behavior of the staff, the locked room. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pulled into something far bigger than me, something dangerous. But even then, I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The next morning, I couldn't focus. I went through the motions, brushing my teeth, getting dressed, making breakfast, but everything felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. When I finally arrived back at Paisley Park, I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on me before I even stepped inside. It was like the walls were closing in, the shadows stretching just a little too far. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nerves. I walked into the lobby, and everything looked normal at first. Maria was sitting at the front desk, just like always, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She didn't acknowledge me at all. It was almost like she was pretending I wasn't there. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Maria was always friendly. She always greeted me when I came in. But today, it was as if she couldn't even see me. I moved past her, trying to shake off the unease. I made my way toward the hallway that led to the back of the building where Prince's rooms were located. As I walked, I noticed the staff members I passed weren't acting like themselves either. They moved in slow, deliberate motions, like they were on autopilot. Their faces were blank, devoid of any expression. It was the kind of look that sent a shiver up your spine. They weren't even really there. They were just moving through the motions like they were caught in some kind of trance. I kept walking, trying to keep my composure, but the feeling of being watched was getting stronger. It wasn't just in my head. There was something else in the building, something that didn't belong, something that made the air thicker, harder to breathe. My steps felt heavier as I moved down the hallway, my feet dragging against the carpet as if they didn't want to go any further. I turned the corner and found myself standing in front of the restricted area, the door I had seen open a few days ago. It was closed now, but I could still feel the weight of the space behind it. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Again, I shouldn't have gone in. I knew better. But something about it pulled me closer, like it was calling to me. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. The chill ran down my spine, and I pulled my hand back, staring at the door as if it were a puzzle I couldn't solve. I felt the urge to turn away, but I couldn't. It was like I had no control over my own body. I pushed the door open. The room was exactly the same as I remembered it. Dimly lit, full of records, guitars, and framed photographs of Prince. But there was something wrong. The air in the room felt colder, the shadows darker. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange weight in my chest. It wasn't just the physical space, it was the feeling. It was like the room was alive, like it was aware of me, of my presence. I could feel the energy shift, like something had changed since I'd last been there. I moved further into the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls seemed to close in around me, the space shrinking with each step I took. The air was thick, heavy, as if it were filled with something I couldn't see. I looked over at the window, half expecting to see the usual view of the parking lot, but instead, there was just darkness. The kind of darkness that swallowed everything. And then, it happened. The door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed through the room, louder than anything I had ever heard. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no one there. The door was locked. The room was locked. I was alone. I could hear it now, the faintest sound coming from the corner of the room. It was a whisper. No, more like a hiss, low and insistent, like it was right behind me. My body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air was thickening, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I slowly turned toward the source of the sound, my eyes straining to make out anything in the dim light. But there was nothing, just the shadows. The whispers grew louder, the air colder. I could see my breath now, misting in front of me. My fingers shook as I reached for the door handle, desperate to leave. But the door wouldn't budge. It was stuck. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, just out of the light. I couldn't make out its features, but I knew it was watching me. It wasn't just a shadow. It was alive. I could feel its presence, like it was a part of the room, a part of the darkness itself. My heart raced. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. And that's when everything changed. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that room. It felt like time had stopped. The darkness pressed in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The only sound was the whispering, the low hum that seemed to surround me, coming from all directions. It was like 1,000 voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand, echoing in my head, pounding against my skull. The figure in the corner, it wasn't human. I could feel it. Its presence was suffocating, like it was part of the room, part of the darkness itself. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. The longer I stared at it, the more it seemed to shift, to twist in a way that defied logic. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see its outline, like a shadow that refused to be defined, moving in a way that didn't feel natural. I took a step back, trying to put distance between myself and whatever that was. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind screaming at me to leave, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. It wasn't just fear, it was dread. The kind of fear that takes over every inch of your body and freezes you in place. And then the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. My body felt like it was buzzing, like every nerve was on fire. My fingers twitched at my sides, but I couldn't make my body obey. I wanted to scream, to shout, to break free from whatever was holding me in that room. But the silence was worse than the whispers. It felt wrong, and I realized in that terrifying moment that I wasn't alone in the room anymore. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, desperate for any hint of movement. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound. Footsteps. Soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing second. I tried to move, to run, but my body felt heavy, like I was trapped in quicksand, unable to escape. The footsteps were getting closer. Whoever or whatever was in the room with me was drawing nearer, closing the distance between us. The air grew colder. I could see my breath now, coming in short, panicked bursts. But it wasn't just the cold. It was like the temperature in the room had dropped drastically, almost to the point where I could feel my bones aching. My skin prickled, as if the very air around me had become charged, alive with something I couldn't explain. And then, a voice. It wasn't like a human voice. It wasn't even a voice, really. It was more like a thought, an idea, a feeling that echoed in my mind. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it made my heart stop. You shouldn't have opened that door. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as the words sank in. I didn't know if I had heard them out loud or if they were just in my head, but they were unmistakable. The voice wasn't Prince's. It couldn't have been. But it was familiar. It felt like it had come from the walls themselves, like the room was speaking to me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. I tried to take a step forward to get out of the room, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt like I was being held in place, like the air around me was thick with something I couldn't fight against. I couldn't even see the figure anymore, but I knew it was there, just beyond my sight. I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through me like it was inside my mind, inside my very soul. The footsteps were closer now, right behind me. I could feel the pressure building, like something was about to happen, something I wasn't prepared for. I turned quickly, almost too quickly, and there it was. A figure. It was him, or at least, it looked like him. The figure standing in front of me wasn't Prince, not really. His face was twisted, distorted, like something was pulling at it from the inside, warping it. His eyes were empty, black, like there was nothing behind them, no soul, no life. And his mouth, it was stretched into a grin, too wide, too unnatural. I stumbled backward, my body shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. The air felt too thick. The figure, whatever it was, didn't speak. It just stood there, staring at me, watching me with those empty eyes. I wanted to say something, to scream, but no words came. The room seemed to close in on me, the darkness getting darker, the shadows getting deeper until I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. Then the figure took a step forward, and everything inside me screamed to run, but I couldn't. And that's when everything changed. The moment the figure moved toward me, I felt my body freeze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of that room, but my legs were paralyzed. I stood there rooted to the spot as if I had no control over my own body. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else. The air around me was thick, heavy, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the walls were closing in. And with each step the figure took, the space around me seemed to shrink. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The figure's eyes, those dark, empty eyes, were locked on mine. And it felt like they were digging into me, pulling me apart from the inside. It wasn't just a stare. It was alive. I could feel it, crawling under my skin, twisting my thoughts, bending my reality. I wasn't just scared of it. I was terrified, deep in my soul. Like this thing wasn't just a ghost or a hallucination. It was something far worse, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The figure stopped a few feet from me, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't even blink. My mind screamed at me to look anywhere else, to run, to escape. But I couldn't. The air felt thick, oppressive, like something ancient and dark had taken root in the very building itself, and I was caught in its web. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The silence in the room was deafening, except for the sound of my heartbeat, thumping louder and louder as I stood frozen. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't like any voice I'd ever heard before. It wasn't even human. It was more like a whisper, a hiss, coming from somewhere deep inside my own head. It wasn't words at first, just a sound. But then it came into focus. You shouldn't be here. The words hit me like a physical blow, but they weren't just words, they were a command. I felt them tug at my soul like they were pulling me apart, wrenching my reality from its foundation. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what it wanted, what it meant. But I knew it wasn't good. It wasn't just a threat. It was something deeper, darker. Like this thing wanted something from me, something I couldn't give. The figure took another step closer, and this time I could hear its breath. It wasn't the sound of a human breath, though. It was ragged, strained, like something wasn't quite right with the air itself. I could see the way the air around it shimmered, distorted, like reality was bending in its presence. You should have stayed away, it hissed, its voice vibrating through me, crawling under my skin, digging into my bones. I finally snapped out of the trance. I didn't think, I just reacted. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the floor as I ran down the hallway, not looking back. My breath was ragged, my legs burning from the adrenaline, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't go back there. Not after what I had seen. Not after what it had done to me. But even as I ran, I knew it was following me. I could feel it. The air behind me was thick, suffocating, like the darkness was closing in on me and I was running out of time. Every step I took, I could feel its presence. It was like it was inside me, inside my head, in my thoughts. I reached the exit door, the one that led outside, and I shoved it open with all my strength. The cool night air hit me like a shockwave, and I stumbled out into the parking lot, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know if it was still there, still watching me, still waiting for me. I made it to my car, fumbled with the keys, and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I had to leave. I couldn't stay there. Not after what I'd seen. After what had happened. But as I drove, the dread didn't fade. It only grew. The farther I got from Paisley Park, the more it lingered. It was like a shadow, following me, creeping through my thoughts. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it there, standing in the road behind me. But there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was there, just waiting. I don't know how long I drove, but eventually I pulled into a gas station. My hands were still trembling as I pumped gas, and I couldn't seem to calm down. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had happened, but it didn't make sense. How could it? I had seen something that shouldn't be real. I had seen something that didn't belong in this world. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, just a bad dream that I'd wake up from, but I knew better. I knew what I had seen. I knew what was still with me. I finished pumping the gas, paid, and got back into my car. But before I could even start the engine, I heard something. A tap. Soft, rhythmic, like someone knocking on my window. I froze, staring straight ahead, too afraid to look to my side. I could feel the presence. I knew it was there, but I couldn't bring myself to turn. Not yet. Not until I was sure. Another tap. Louder this time. I turned slowly, and there, standing outside my window, was the figure. It wasn't close. It wasn't right in front of me, but it was there. Just standing in the darkness, its eyes glowing, its presence suffocating the air around me. I could feel it again, pressing against me, invading my thoughts. I slammed the car into gear and sped off, but as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw it standing still in the distance, its eyes never leaving me. It wasn't over. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I thought I could escape, but it's still here. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it watching me, waiting. I can't outrun it no matter how far I go. If I disappear, if you never hear from me again, don't search. Whatever was in that room, it's still out there, and it's coming for me. And soon, it'll come for you.